We have been on a journey, and we're looking at the 7 key areas that God wants to transform in your life. We've looked at your spiritual health. We've looked at your physical health. We've looked at mental health, and we've looked at emotional health. And this week in our message this morning, in our small group study, in our devotionals, we're going to focus on relational health, transforming your relationships, how to make your relationships better. And what I want to do this morning is look at diffusing the fears that can ruin your relationships. And to do that, we're going to go all the way back to the book of Genesis, the very first book of the Bible, and look at the first couple, Adam and Eve, because that's where all the problems started. Thank you, Adam, and thank you, Eve. So we're going to go back to the beginning. You're familiar with the story. There are several theories as to why God created Adam and Eve and so forth. One theory is that God created Adam, and then he wanted to tell man something, so he created woman. I didn't think you ladies would laugh at that one, but that's okay. Another theory is that God created man, and God thought, well, I can do better than that. So he created woman. Oh, I knew I'd get some amens to that. My theory is that God created man, then he rested, and then God created woman, and now both God and man haven't rested since. But anyway, either way you look at it, God created man and woman, and he placed them in the perfect surroundings, in the perfect garden, perfect atmosphere, and they had a perfect relationship. This was the only perfect relationship that ever existed. Things went along really great for a long time between man and woman because there was no sin. There was no sadness, no sickness, no sorrow, no suffering, no deceit, no lying, no manipulating, no jealousy, no Jerry Springer, no none of that stuff. Everything was perfect. And then Satan comes along to tempt Eve, and he lies to her and says, didn't God say you can't eat from any of the trees in the garden? Of course, God didn't say that. Well, let's do this. Let's do it this way. Let's do it this way. Let's pick up the story in Genesis chapter 3, beginning in verse 6. It says, so Eve ate some of the fruit. Then she also gave some to her husband Adam, who was with her, and he ate it. Immediately their eyes were opened, and they suddenly felt shame at their nakedness. Now, folks, this is where shame enters the world. There had never been any shame, any guilt, or any fear prior to this event. So they sewed fig leaves together to cover up themselves. Then they heard the Lord walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid from God among the trees. But God called out to Adam, where are you, Adam? Adam replied, I heard you coming, and I was afraid. Notice the fear again. Because I was naked, so I hid. Then God asked, who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from? Adam said, you gave me this woman. You see the humor in that? You gave me this woman, and she gave me the fruit, so I ate it. Then God said to Eve, why did you do this? Eve replied, the serpent deceived me, and I ate it. So God said to Eve, because you disobeyed me, in other words, you didn't do what I told you to do, there's going to be a curse now. Everything's broken. And one of the things that's broken, is going to be broken, is childbirth. He says there's going to be pain. Here's what he said. You have greater trouble in pregnancy and great pain in childbirth. Any moms want to testify to that this morning? Thank Eve for that one, okay? And he also said, and though you'll desire your husband, he's going to lord it over you. In other words, there's going to be conflict. There's going to be domination issues. There's going to be a power struggle in your relationship from now on. Then God said to Adam, because you also disobeyed me and sinned with your wife, the ground you work is now cursed. And though you get to eat what you planted, your fields will have weeds and thorns and thistles. So we can thank Adam for all the weed in the world, right? All the weeds in the world, right? And he says, for the rest of your life, you'll have to sweat and work hard to get your food until you yourself are returned to the dirt that I used to create you. Now, this is a fascinating story filled with enormous amounts of spiritual truth in it, But I just want to point out this morning the relational truth. Because in this story, we see three basic fundamental fears that pop up in every relationship that makes relationships difficult. Now, you can use these principles now in dealing with small groups of people. You can use them in your marriage. You can use it with your boyfriend or your girlfriend. You can use it with your spouse. I mean, these three fundamental fears that started in the first relationship when sin entered are still present in your life and everybody else's life, and they damage and they destroy the potential in all relationships. So let's get right to it this morning. How our fears ruin relationships. Here's the first fear. The first fear we learn is this, is the fear of exposure. Write that down in your workbook if you haven't. The fear of exposure makes me distant. The fear of exposure makes me distant. Why can't I get closer to people? Why can't I get close to others? I like to be closer to my wife. I like to be closer to my husband. I like to have that intimacy, that soul passionate intimacy of partnership. Why can't I get closer to people in my life? Well, my fear of exposure makes me distant. See, here's the truth. There's a lot in you that you don't like. There's a lot in you that you don't like. You don't like it about you. And because you don't like it about you, you certainly don't want anybody else to see it. The things that you don't accept about you, you have a fear will not be accepted by others, so you keep your distance. Because when people get close to you, they can see you warts and all. The closer people get, the more they see your blemishes. The more they see your flaws. The more they see your faults and your failures and your weaknesses. So we keep people at a distance. Because fear of exposure, that people will know what we already know about ourselves. Those things you don't like about you, you don't want others to know that they exist. Here's what it says in verse 9 of Genesis. God called Adam and says, "Why are you hiding?" And Adam said, "I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." Now let me say a couple things right here. Whenever God asks you a question like this, he asked Adam two questions. He says, "Where are you and why are you hiding?" Whenever God asks that question, he already knows the answer, right? So he's not asking for information. He's not asking for his own benefit. He's asking a question for Adam's benefit because he wants Adam to own up to what's going on. He wants Adam to man up. He wants Adam to acknowledge why he was running and hiding. See, any transformation in any area of your life, including relationships, only happens when you own up to the fact that your relationship isn't what it ought to be. That you have failed in some way in your relationship. So nothing can change, nothing can be transformed until you man up, until you woman up and admit this is what's going on. So notice what Adam says. I was afraid and I hid. Notice those two. They go together. I was afraid and I hid. Fear always causes us to hide. And I wonder this morning, what are you hiding from today? What are you hiding from today? What is it? What are you pretending not to know? What are you pretending isn't a problem in your relationship? What are you pretending isn't a problem in your marriage and you just ignore it and ignored it? What are you pretending isn't a problem in your relationship because you are afraid of facing the truth? Well, God doesn't want you to fake it. He wants you to face it when it comes to fear. What are you pretending not to know? Adam said, I was afraid and I hid. Notice he says also, I was naked. Now, what does it mean to be naked? Well, folks, he's talking about more than just physical nakedness. There is an emotional nakedness too. To be naked means to be exposed, to be uncovered, to be vulnerable, to not be authentic. It means you're out in the open. You're unprotected. You're never more vulnerable than when you're naked. It's just all out there. And so Adam says, listen, I was afraid because I was naked. There's nothing to hide. See, when we are afraid of nakedness and vulnerability and afraid of being open and afraid of being honest and afraid of letting people see us as we really are, that fear makes us distant. We want to keep our distance from people. Listen, folks, one of your deepest needs is to be loved. One of your deepest needs in your life is to be loved. But one of your biggest fears is the fear of being seen for what you really are. Oh, yeah. So you can live with a man or woman for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years and have secrets because you're afraid they won't accept that part of your life. And so many of our spouses don't really know us, not for real. They might know what color you like, but they don't really know us because we're afraid they may not accept that part of our life. Well, I want you to notice the damage that fear does to a relationship. There are 3 stages that you go through, and we see all these stages here in this part. Phase 1 is shame. Phase 1 is shame. Notice that in verse 7. It says, they suddenly felt shame at their nakedness. Fear is often based in shame. When you carry shame, you are easily embarrassed. When you carry shame, you fear embarrassment almost more than anything else. And you would do almost anything in your life to avoid being embarrassed. That's the symptom that you're carrying unresolved shame in your life. Shame makes me more self-conscious. It makes me more nervous. It makes me fearful of being humiliated. And so I'm going to avoid it at all costs. Shame means I'm easily mortified, because if you have any of those things in your life, it means that there's some shame you haven't given to God and let him take it away in your life. The first phase is shame. The second phase is cover up. What happens is when we feel ashamed, we try to conceal who we really are. Notice what it says in verse 7b. So they sewed fig leaves together to cover up themselves. Now, if you have ever seen a fig leaf, you know it's not very big. So for some of us, it'll take a whole lot of fig leaves to cover us up. Today, though, we have all kinds of sophisticated ways of covering up who we are. We don't have to use fig leaves anymore, but we do it all the time. I wonder what ways you use to cover up your fears and your insecurities. What ways do you use to cover them up? Some people use humor. Some people feel that they're the class clown, but they don't let anybody get close to them, so they joke about everything. That's just a way to cover up. Some people, maybe they try to cover their insecurities by presenting an image that you're all together. And so all on Facebook, you got it all together, but we know that ain't true. You got all kinds of issues in your life. A lot of people hide behind an online image. But that's it, that fear, that shame, that cover up. Then notice the third phase. That's that distance from God. Verse 8 says, then they hid from God among the trees. A long time ago, a man wrote a book called Why Am I Afraid to Tell You Who I Really Am? Why am I afraid to tell you who I really am? And that's a good question. Why am I afraid to tell you? The answer to that question was the reason I'm afraid to tell you who I really am is because you may not like who I really am. You may not like it. And if I share who I really am, not who I'm pretending to be, if I share who I really am and you don't accept me, man, I'm going to feel real bad. I'm going to feel rejected. So they hid from God among the trees. This causes us now not only to be disconnected from other people and why we have relationship problems with others, but now we're disconnected from God. And we got a relationship problem with him. Listen, folks, God doesn't expect you to be perfect, but God sure expects you to be honest and to be real before him. So that's the first fear we have to deal with. The second fear we see right here is this, the fear of disapproval. The fear of disapproval. Now, my fear of disapproval makes me defensive. Okay? So now we're moved from simply hiding and running and covering up to now being defensive, and we start attacking other people. We start getting back. We're not just hiding, we're hurling. We're not just excusing ourselves, we're now accusing others. Now, in this stage, when I have this fear of disapproval, I start pointing fingers at everybody else. You hear people say, but you did that. And they say, but you did this, but you did that. That's moving from hiding to hurling, from excusing to accusing. Listen to this now, and remember this. The more critical a person is, the more you know they fear disapproval. The more critical a person is, the more you know they fear disapproval. They're always putting somebody else down. You know that person has a fear of disapproval, because that's the way it shows up. The more I fear disapproval in my life, the more I'm going to point at other people and all of their issues. Notice what happened in verse 12. God came to Adam and asked, did you eat what I told you not to eat? Adam answered and said, you gave me this woman, and she gave me the fruit, so I ate it. So Adam took it like a man and blamed his wife. As a matter of fact, he's not even blaming his wife. He's really blaming God. He's saying, God, you gave me this woman. You put her here. I didn't choose her. You gave her to me. So he's not only blaming her, he's blaming God. Listen, if you hadn't made this woman, you and me, God, we'd be like this. And I don't know how many times I've heard husbands say, man, I'd really be closer to God if I had a spiritual wife. Yeah, right. Hey, he's blaming God. She got me all messed up. She's the reason I'm not where I need to be spiritually. So Adam's blaming not only Eve, he's blaming God for his choice. He's passing the responsibility. But sorry, ladies, Eve wasn't any more willing to accept responsibility. Because when God came to Eve and said, what are you doing? Here's what she said in verse 13. The serpent deceived me and I ate it. So Adam blames his wife. Eve blames the snake. Nobody takes responsibility. Well, this happens in your marriage and your relationships all the time. If anybody says anything to you, your wife says something to you that you feel has a hint of disapproval, I know what I do. I immediately get defensive. Am I the only one? I'm the only one? Excuse me. Hey, you ask a question, you get an answer, right? But you either explain it away, or you attack back, or you accuse, or you excuse, or you say something catty or whatever. My fear of exposure makes me distant, and my fear of disapproval makes me defensive. But here's a third fear I see in Adam, and that's the fear of losing control. The fear of losing control. Number 3, my fear of losing control makes me demanding. It makes me demanding. The result of Adam and Eve's sin is they lost control. Now, they lost control of everything. They lost control of their future. They lost control of their destiny. They got kicked out of paradise, folks. And now they're feeling totally out of control because they weren't controlling anything at this point. In this situation, my fear of losing control makes me demanding. Or let me say it this way, and you can identify this in some of your relationships. The more out of control you feel, the more demanding you become. Amen? The more out of control you feel, the more demanding you become. I start bossing everybody around. I start making all kinds of demands. I start defending and demanding and demeaning. I start dominating. The more insecure you are, the greater you have the need to get your way. Insecure folks have to take control of stuff and take control of people. If you're a very secure person, you don't have to have your way all the time. You don't have to get it. It doesn't bother you. You don't have to do it. But if you're insecure, then you have to have your way all the time. Am I the only one? There you go again. Let me just stop asking questions over there. Am I the only one?